Yshai, thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Parenting Podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. It really is a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk about teenagers and staying connected with your teens. It's kind of, it's sort of perfect for today because, the listener, you hear all the conversations all in different orders. But as far as in my life goes, I just talked to Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who's talking about hold on to your teens. And now we're going to talk about staying connected to your teens. So this is so ideal for me. I'm so ready for it. But before we get into talking about that, I would love to talk a little bit about you. Sometimes we get into this because, just curiosity. Sometimes we're reacting against something that might have happened in our own childhood. How were you raised and what was your childhood like?
Yeah, so I grew up in Portland. I was born in Israel, but came to Portland when I was just under 2. So spent my life here where I still live. And I would say, generally speaking, I had what you would say on paper, a really good childhood. I was safe. My parents adored me, loved me, gave, lots of, my dad in particular spent lots of time with me and all those things. Like, so on paper, I would say it was really good. What I've learned later in life, what was hard. So my parents did divorce when I was 11, but I had a rough go of it in middle school and high school. I did experience some bullying here and there, and I was a kid who was I was extremely sensitive. We talk about the highly sensitive kids. Like, I was one of those.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Me too.
yeah, I struggled with sleepovers. I would get stomach aches and want to go home. Um, kind of a thing. And I would just get really flooded and overwhelmed easily. And this was back, in the late 80s, mid late 80s, where we didn't have the information. So I just thought, like, I always felt like an outsider and I didn't fit in. And why am I getting overwhelmed and other people aren't? And I had a hard time making friends. And keeping friends. And so I felt like I was on the outside looking in and just wanting to be popular and cool and fit in. And I played basketball in high school. Like, that was something I was a little bit taller, and it was something I was drawn to in middle school and I loved. And but it was also a way for me an in a little bit to try to feel accepted. But it was a journey of wanting to feel accepted, and struggling to find an identity that worked for me. Feeling different a little bit in a way that I didn't really know why, and not wanting to be different. And and it really took later in looking back, kind of reflecting. For the longest time, even in grad school, I would look back on my childhood. I would hear about other people's childhoods, right? And they would share stories that were just, there was a lot of trauma and a lot of pain or domestic violence or these hard things. And I would just think, oh my gosh, like, I had such a great childhood. I have nothing to complain about. Like, my parents loved me. And even though they did divorce, but they had like the ideal amicable relationship. Like, my dad had a key to the house. He was over all the time. I saw him some ways more than my mom because she was a working mom. She worked a lot. So you almost like wouldn't know they were divorced, kind of a thing. So I was very lucky. But as I've kind of learned about myself and went to therapy and grew, and I think this does inform how I work, I realized, pain isn't just about what happens to us. It's also what we didn't get that we needed. And for all my parents, like, for all the love they had for me, there were some things that they really were not able to give me. They didn't know how to provide in terms of attunement, empathy. I never really felt seen. They focused on grades. They focused on a future of being successful, going to college. And I'm grateful for some of those expectations, for sure. But in terms of my inner world, I was very alone with it. Like, there was a lot of shame and fear and feeling like, what's wrong with me, and not liking myself. And I just had this inner world that it took me to my late 20s, early 30s to unpack. And I'm still working on it. Some of these parts that were never seen as a kid.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because, it's like that their love for you may come out in this form of like, well, I'm critical of you so that you can be, good. And I want you to do all these things. So I'm going to focus all the things you're not doing well so you can do them well so you can be, successful in the world. But that, especially having just had these conversations about attachment. I mean, it sounds like that warmth was really, that feeling of like being seen. I mean, that's critical to saying, you see me, you hear me, I'm with you, you're on my side, all that stuff, right? This is kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, yeah. And it was really a generation. I mean, I think that was not a common thing
Yeah,
at that
normal.
generation. I mean, my mom grew up in foster care actually, which is
Oh,
very interesting.
mm-hmm.
And so I think just some of the attachment stuff that she had, and and then my dad, just an immigrant, came here at 28 years old. English is a second language. From my family on that side is from Yemen.
Mm,
And so there was just a lot of that assimilation, that desire. The immigrant story that's very common is wanting me to assimilate, wanting me to fit in
mm.
and do well and achieve and all those things. So which all seemed normal at the time, right? Like until like you kind of learn something different, and then you see, oh, there is another way of being, there is more going on here. Yeah.
Yeah, it just goes to show. I'm just thinking about how, like, our own, as parents, the best thing we can offer our kids is like us being grounded, like
Mm,
secure, like at ease, at peace, and just all
mm,
these like demons that come from generations and ancestors and all these patterns of it just that matters
yeah.
so enormously. So I don't know.
Yeah, and it
It's
gets
just
so tricky. It's so much harder. Then that's why we need to keep learning and reflecting, because it's like we know the stuff, but then sometimes it's so hard to do in the moment with our own kids.
yeah, yeah. And so, what made you want to work with teenagers? It sounds like this experience led right to that.
Totally. I mean, so that's the deeper part, right? Like the unconscious draw. Kind of on the surface, it kind of found me. I was actually a business major in college, and then I got a corporate job working in retail, for a large as a buyer for a large department store chain. And I just met somebody casually. I was like 23, and we were just talking, and she was like, "Hey, I was looking for something else to do other than work, to kind of volunteer, get involved in the community." That's always been sort of a core piece of me, of wanting to sort of give back or help, or contribute to making the world better. And so she was like, "I'm involved in this mentoring program, and we actually have a volunteer meeting next week." And it was just a spontaneous thing, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting." And it was mentoring at-risk youth that were like 13 years old, and I was like, "Sure, why not? Maybe I'll might be interesting." And so I just kind of on a whim, like, just went. And I was just really, it was very interesting. It was very involved, and or well organized, and it just kind of spoke to me. So I like committed to this 1 year volunteer program, where as a mentor you go through weekend intensive trainings and learn about yourself and personal development stuff, and then how to work with these youth and their families and all this stuff. And I just learned so much. And I was like, it was the community and the idea. And it turned out that I was pretty good at connecting with young people.
Mm,
So I was like, this is really interesting. It's really fun. I'm good at it. I think I want to do more of this. I don't know how I'll make a living, but I'll figure that out later. And so then I just kind of went down that path. I was just really drawn. Now, like you said, um, when I reflect, and I go a little deeper, it's like I really think that a lot of my work is about healing some of my own pain, like my loneliness when I was a kid.
mhm,
It's almost like every time I
sure.
connect with a young person or a family, I'm like connecting with that part in me, that little boy who wants to feel seen, wants to feel heard. And so being able to offer that to others feels meaningful.
Are are teenagers more disconnected now? It really seems like it from my perspective. I have two teenage girls now,
Hmm.
14 and 17. And, even they have friends and stuff like that, but they're not. I don't know. I remember like being in the kitchen closet with that long phone cord,
Yeah.
talking for hours and hours,
Yeah.
just having these long, intensive conversations, having a lot of. I never wanted to, if I had to, if I to be home on the weekend was just kind of like, it was like, well, okay, I'm feeling really sad and miserable if I'm home. Like, at least I'll, get connect with other people. I, I'm not seeing like, it seems like their world with the mediation of the phone it seems like it's really disconnecting them. Is that what you're seeing with teens?
I think I see both. I think it's a mixed bag.
Hmm.
I think there are, for some kids, I think the phones are adding to deeper connection. I actually do think, I think it's not all good or bad. I think there are ways for some kids, they are still finding that connection. And in fact, a lot of, this is sort of the upside, I think for some kids, the discourse is more around, they're talking about mental health. They're talking about wanting to connect. I mean, there are kids who are like, we should, we want to hang out in person. We want to put our phones away, um, and and they're valuing that, and they're making they're using their phones to make plans together and things like that. I mean, I do think that that happens for sure. What I worry about are the kids who, like who I would have been like, where they struggle a little bit more with connecting naturally. Maybe it's social anxiety, or maybe it's just some other developmental challenges. And so the phones and devices, they make that just so incredibly easy to go deeper into disconnection,
Mm.
to like kind of lean into a virtual relationship. And it's just so much easier to avoid in-person relationships. So I worry about the ones who are on the edge, who could go either way,
Hmm.
and who can really kind of get lost in being overly dependent on sort of superficial connections that are all online or mostly online.
Well, I appreciate you presenting a balanced view because, yeah, I mean, like anything, sometimes I think, oh my god, it's like destroying our kids' lives. But that, like anything, it's got its upsides and it's got its downsides. And I've heard that, like, that kids are, more aware and kind of navigating it in some ways better than sometimes like even older generations are getting lost and things like that. But
Yeah.
um your book, Staying Connected with Your Teen: Polyvagal Parenting Strategies to Reduce Reactivity, Set Limits, and Build Authentic Connection. It talks about obviously parenting strategies grounded in polyvagal theory. So tell us, what is polyvagal theory and why this is so crucial to what you're doing?
Yes, I know it's a mouthful. It's not the most accessible term. But we had to put it in the subtitle at least. I didn't want to have it in the title. Um, but so, but it really is groundbreaking. It's changed my life personally. It's helped me help clients in a whole nother way. So basically, what it is, it's a model for thinking about how our nervous system interacts with the world, our nervous system affects the way we think about ourselves, about others, and about the world. That's essentially what it is. And what's really powerful about it is, so we have three pathways, three states, that we all experience, um, that comes from our nervous system. And you can think of this as a hierarchy, or I use a metaphor of a ladder, which is something that comes from Deb Dana, who's a researcher who is colleagues with Stephen Porges, is the founder of this model. He discovered this model, and Deb Dana is his colleague. And so she made this very popular. It's an incredibly popular model among therapists. Most therapists understand and use this in working and helping people. So I'm excited to bring this to just regular everyday people, this thinking. So the model of the ladder metaphor means that, so we have three states. I call them, at the bottom rungs of the ladder are shut down. And that's that state. We know it when we're in it. It's like we're disconnected, we're withdrawn, maybe we're just kind of meh. Um, I color code it in my mind. I think of it as a blue state. It could be depression. It could be mild depression. It could just be that sort of like, it's more a kind of immobilized, low energy state. As we move up the ladder, the second state is, it's more activated. So this is referred to sometimes as a sympathetic state. So this is where there's adrenaline and cortisol, where anxiety might live. We're mobilized. We're active. It's like we see it with kids. They're fidgety, or they're angry, or we're we're just really. It's an activated state. It's fight, flight, freeze.
Okay.
And as we move up the ladder, the top rungs of the ladder, the third state that we all experience is a regulated state. And that's that state when we feel, again, we know it when we're in it. We feel calm, peaceful, connected, um, joyful, maybe excited, happy, all those good things that we all want to feel. So all of us experience these states. This is our nervous system. Our nervous system is our first responder, is what's paying attention to the world. The term is for this is neuroception. Like you and I right now, our nervous systems are responding to each other more so in some ways than just our words and our language. We're picking up on our backgrounds, on our tone of voice, on our facial expressions. That's how we communicate with other people. And with parenting, this feels so helpful. This was so helpful to me. And it's helpful, I think, for other parents to think about, like, our kids are responding to us from their nervous system first, not their thoughts and perception. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we can forget that. Like I can forget that. And I'm like talking to my kid. I'm giving them all this information. Like, don't you understand? We talked about this. What is, you know, and they're not hearing any of it
Mm.
because their nervous system is responding to my tone of voice, to my intensity, to my body language. And
Mm.
so when we can understand like this concept of we connect through our nervous system, and that our ultimate goal is to help our kids get better at regulating, at moving up the ladder. And some of us have kids that live more in that middle state, that
Mm.
activated state. Some of us have kids who are more in that shutdown state. And so the real question is, how do we help our kids get more regulated? Because only from that place of regulation can we actually connect.
Mm.
We can fake it, we can pretend, but our kids are deer in the headlights sometimes. And it's not because they don't care. It's not because they're lazy. When our kids are shut down, it can seem like they're not trying or they're lazy, but they can't. Their nervous system is immobilized. And so when we just try harder and harder and harder, it can be very frustrating as a parent because we think they just need to do it. But when we understand that it's it's not that they're trying to get out of something or being manipulative or lazy. It's like they are in shutdown. And so we want to think about how to help move up, and get more regulated and help them learn to be regulated more of the time, which is the
Mm.
name of the game. And I just found that super helpful.
Yeah, yeah, this is a very helpful way of thinking about it. So shut down at the bottom, and then it's almost like, uh, you know, it's almost like maybe a bell curve or something. You're moving up to activated, like almost too much energy, and then you kind of go down to regulated in some ways. Like, as I guess that's my visual thinking
Okay.
about it.
Okay.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
as far as like
Yeah.
amounts of energy, right? What and regulated is where we're connecting. What can help our kids, so then you teach this to teens, you teach this to parents. What do you teach them first, as far as like moving from shutdown to regulated or from activated to regulated? How do you go
Mhm.
about kind of helping people sort of conceptualize how they could move through these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I think is awareness. And we
Mm.
parents also have the same nervous system. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important that we also recognize where we are. So
Hmm.
so it's a parallel process, and it's always great to learn together with our kids. It builds credibility and builds trust. So I do a lot, even though I work with teenagers, I do a lot of family therapy with teenagers, and it can be really powerful. Um, and so learning together. So one is just recognizing without judgment, these aren't bad. None of these are bad. Like, they're all protective. They serve
Hmm.
a purpose. So we want to be able to learn about recognizing what state we're in without judgment. Like, oh God, I shouldn't be this way. No, you
Hmm.
should. There's a
Hmm.
reason that that's showing up for you right now. And we need to understand it with empathy and compassion. That's the only way to help move through that state. So it is considered to be a continuum or a hierarchy of states. And so you move through one to get to the next. And so shutdown is the furthest away from regulation. It's like
Mm-hmm.
working with someone who's depressed is a lot harder than working with someone who's anxious. Anxiety typically precedes depression. Um, and so we want to move them through those states. And so first is awareness. And then it becomes, as you know, like it's so powerful. Sometimes even just knowing what's going on really
Mm-hmm.
opens up the door to change.
Yeah.
Um, but then when it comes to practical strategies, it's thinking about little ways to work on um, creating more energy, more mobilized energy, more regulation. And so that's things like coping skills and coping strategies. But from like a biological nervous system polyvagal perspective, um, there are some things that are specifically helpful. So I always recommend so things like um, music, playing or listening is incredibly helpful for the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Nature, movement, um, is really, these things are incredibly, these are subconscious. So the autonomic nervous system, it's called that because it's automatic. These are automatic processes. They just happen. You know, if I'm in the woods and I just see, I'm just hiking and having a beautiful time and a pack of wolves shows up, you know, surrounds me, guess what? I don't have control over what my body does in that moment.
No.
Right?
No.
It's like, we'll see, you know,
Yeah.
knowing
Yeah. Yeah.
myself, I'd probably freeze.
Knowing, yeah, it's like sometimes when there's all this advice on like what to do if you see a bear, and it's like, well,
Right.
will I be able to implement that thing I heard about what to do when I
Yeah,
see a
exactly. Or
bear?
even remember it. I probably wouldn't even
Yeah,
remember it.
exactly. You're not even thinking about it in your brain. And I just forgot to mention, like, we're talking about polyvagal theory, and we're talking about this because of the vagus nerve, which is the largest
Yes,
nerve, as I understand, that goes. Do you want to just explain that piece?
totally. So, I don't know. So if the autonomic nervous system is like, I'm going to date myself, as Destiny's Child, the vagus nerve is Beyonce. It's kind of a
Great.
celebrity. That's my generation, Destiny's Child. And so it's famous. It's well, you know, and yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So the vagus nerve is really the key component. It's like it's basically it's a cable that goes from our brainstem and it goes down our spinal cord and it has branches and it connects all of our organs to each other. And so it syncs up like our heart and our breathing and all of that. They all go together, right? Our heart rate and our sweat and our pupils and all these things that digestion, all these things that just happen automatically. That's why I call it sometimes the automatic nervous system, because this is the
Mm,
part. And it's a fight or flight. It's designed for survival. And so our body is always trying to think about, do I need to survive here or not? And so when we can, so the vagus is the central piece of that. And so when we, all these things that I was talking about are about, what we want to do is learn how to um, activate the vagus nerve, and so that it can help us. The vagus is how we learn to be calm. When we can settle the vagus nerve, then we feel more calm. We can slow it down. So activating the vagus is what's really popular. There's even like surgical procedures, vagus nerve stimulators now, but you don't need to do that. All these things we're talking about now, that I talk about in the book, are about natural ways that we can activate the vagus nerve, like yoga, nature, movement, like all these things. Is
So
what That's what we're really trying to do, is activate the vagus.
I mean, you mentioned, yeah, music, nature, movement. These are all kind of like individual sort of things, or could be perceived as this way. I mean, would connection be one of the
Mm.
important pieces of activating the vagus nerve and regulating?
So I'm so glad you said that. So that's the crux of my book. Is so this is kind of the background around the polyvagal stuff, but ultimately the number one way, the most important and critical way that we create regulation is through a process called co-regulation,
Mm.
which is the fact that we need a regulated other in order to feel regulated. We know this at birth. Like, no one has to learn about that with a baby. They're literally physically connected at birth. But this need for a calm, trustworthy other to help us regulate is important through the lifespan. And so co-regulation is the number one way we help our kids regulate. We help them live in that more regulated state. So, of course, it starts with us. And I wanted to talk about this in this book about emphasizing connection, because connection with one, for one reason, well, one thing is we think sometimes teenagers don't need us anymore as parents.
Hmm.
And I want to like kind of dispel that. Like they absolutely need connection with us as much as ever. It just looks really different. So I want to like make that part really clear. And then we want to help them experience more connection in different areas of their life, with peers, with other adults. Pets can actually be co-regulating as well. So that's the good news. If you don't have someone, you know, don't underestimate the power of that dog or cat, or we have a bearded dragon at home, and sometimes that can even be helpful.
that's that's funny because my daughter was a big driver of getting our dog in January 2020. She'd been asking for so long, and
Mm.
I finally gave in. We got the dog. Anyway, the dog is, well, Dr. Sue Johnson talked to me for the podcast, and she said, I don't know, I think it was her. She was talking about like how pets are so much like, or maybe it was someone else. Dear listener, don't hold me to that. But was talking about how pets are so much like, and this dog, she's a pit bull. She is like the most like snugly connecting. Like she just wants to cuddle and play and then cuddle and like, and she's like so emotionally tuned, which is crazy. She's so much like
Mm.
the daughter that wanted the dog. She's so attuned that like when we watch a movie, when we watched The Life of Pi with the like with the tiger in it, she and if we get like upset in a movie because there's drama in a movie,
Yeah.
she literally climbs on the couch, starts to lick our face. Well, and during The Life of Pi tried to climb onto my husband's shoulders and kind of like settle behind his shoulders. Granted, this is like a 60-pound pit bull.
Oh,
She's
geez.
just like trying to just like snuggle so close. But anyway, yes, the
That's so
regulation.
cute.
I'm like, she sleeps with my daughter every single night, and just that it's so powerful. I'm
Oh
definitely
my
seeing that with a
gosh,
pet.
that's so sweet. That's super cute. It really does help. It really does
Yeah,
make a
yeah.
difference. I think that's why we love pets so much. Like we don't think about it in that term, but it really is just biologically, like they're nervous system regulators for sure.
Mm. Mm.
Um, yeah, they're also like we have this dog that we're watching for 9 months, and he is a classic protective watchdog. He sits on the top of our couch looking out the window, which is by our front door. Anytime somebody comes to the door, he's like, "Rah, rah, rah, rah," does, barks. And that's kind of like how our nerve, he's like the external
Uh,
animal embodiment of the nervous system, is like looking for cues of danger. And we have to be like, no, it's okay. It's okay.
that's
You're like,
so
Cosmo, it's going to
funny.
be all right. That's just, they're dropping off a package, it's like, okay. And then he kind of moves on, what about this one? What about this one? And we have to like, no, it's okay. Our nervous systems are like that sometimes, and we have to be like, learn for our kids, very sensitive kids are like constantly like, what's that? What's that? Kind of like that inner guard dog. And so being able to help them learn to like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. A lot of these false alarms. So that part, that's kind of interesting as well. Like another way to think about that with when I'm thinking about dogs.
It seems like we almost like have it seems there's a teen mental health crisis, like we all know that, right? And it seems like we almost have more challenges with anxiety and mental health and things like that as we know more about it, and
Mm.
in some ways as the world is somewhat safer in some ways, like
Hmm.
than I mean, except for I guess like there's of course the planet and the gun crisis. Those are two major things that we have no control over that are really, but in other ways the world is so much safer. Like at least in my teen's high school, my older daughter goes to a public school, the most diverse public school in the state of Delaware,
Mm.
and it's they don't have that many fights. Like there were tons of fights in my high school. It wasn't like
Mm.
there was like a lot of, wasn't a huge sense of safety for a lot of people growing up a long time ago. Like you might get, if you've ever watched something like Stand By Me, it's like amazing how much like horrible bullying there was, like, and danger for small children and children of all ages growing up. It almost seems like there's more anxiety in some ways as it's safer, but I guess I'm
Mm,
questioning whether it's safer or not now. But I don't know where I'm going with this. But
yeah.
what do you
No,
think about that?
I mean, like we worry about our kids doing things that like no one worried about me. Like I walked 2 miles in fifth grade, no sidewalks, or anything, no phone or anything like that to school, there and back every day. And I would be stressed out if my kids, when they were in fifth grade, did that.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays a little bit, it's like the standards have kind of changed, even though objectively it is safer now probably than it was ever
Yeah.
before. But I think that is something around like that's sort of like a different type of topic. But like what social media does is our kids in some ways are safer because they're not out and about as much. They are home more. They're not going out. They're taking longer to get driver license. They're not going to parties as much. They're not drinking as much. They're not having sex as much. All
Way
these
less
things.
teen pregnancy, all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. So in some ways that's a good thing, but then in other ways they're also like they're online all the time. So like 24/7 they're like hearing about the worst of the news. They're hearing about different things. And we as parents do as well. Like if we're really honest, like we're often like we're hearing about every single like all the shootings and then we're listening more and more about it, or we're hearing about this crisis, or we're hearing about this problem, or we're hearing about suicide, and we're hearing about this kidnapping or this happening. And then we can have our own little echo chamber, and then we start to worry about our kids. And because we just have so much more information as well. And so then we can get more anxious as well. So we can project that onto our kids as well as them kind of taking that on. I think they can go together.
So we all need these strategies to regulate our nervous system. Um,
Exactly.
with our teens, okay, and I just want to reiterate, dear listener, music, nature, movement, co-regulation, so important. With our teens and with our kids of all ages, how do we balance like this wanting to connect with them, support their emotional regulation, have a like secure attachment, all of those things with appropriate like expectations for walk that dog that is barking at the front door. How, what do you
Hmm.
say to parents about that? Like, are there times if a teen is struggling where you let go of expectations of chores and things like that and focus on a
Mm,
relationship versus,
yeah.
how do we navigate some of those waters?
That's such a great question. I always start with sort of a mantra for me that I think is really useful is connection before correction.
Yeah.
So it does always start with connection, and connection can be little things. It can just be a good morning, as simple as that sometimes, or a good night. It can be thank you for helping. So, and it can be the bigger things and the fun things. So connection is a foundation. Oftentimes when families come to see me, the struggles is they are doing too much correcting and not enough connecting. They're leading with the correction, and which is easy to fall into as a parent, like a trap. We can fall. It's like, because you got to get this done, that done. How's school? Wait, your room's a mess. I asked you to do that chore, you didn't do it. Like, can you be nicer? Blah, blah, blah. And we can fall into that really easily where it's just correct. So I think starting with connection first. Now let's say, okay, got it. There's a foundation of connection. And now that to your question, your point that's really important is what about the expectations? Can we have those? Do we just need to be like buddies? Do we just be nice? And so, no, we do need to have all the research shows that high expectations and high connection leads to the best outcomes for kids. And so, and I think particularly when kids are struggling, we need to have expectations of them. And I talk to parents about this all the time and remind them that expectations are actually how we build self-esteem in our kids, how we build self-confidence. Because like what we know as functioning adults is that the degree of um, resilience and self-esteem and confidence that we have, it's generally speaking, it's earned from hard things we worked through, things we've accomplished, things we've done. It's through our failures, it's through our mistakes, and we just kind of hung in there, right? So like we help our kids develop resilience by having expectations. Now, the tricky part is, how do we do that in a way that matches their abilities, that's reasonable given the circumstances? Because every kid's different, every family's different. So in my book, I have a chapter on expectations, and I have what I call the 5 C's of expectations, to help parents think about how to um, have appropriate expectations. And so those 5 C's are core values, clarity, consistency, capacity, and collaboration. So I can just go through those really briefly if that's
Yeah,
helpful.
please do. I want to know what.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So it starts with core values. Like, what's the why behind this expectation? So it's like, if, I want you to clean your room, like, am I just doing it because I just have, I need your room to be clean because then I can sleep better at night? That's not going to really kind of land very well, right? But if it's grounded in a value of, I think having a clean room, it's a life skill to have. It's going to have improve your mental health, because just having an occasionally organized room is going to help. It's going to reduce the risk of bugs and ants and things like that. Um, those are 3 values. If it's, I want you to like turn in your device at 9 o'clock at night, why? What's the value behind it? Well, we value sleep in our family. That's a number one. That's a really high priority. We value, which is part of another value, which is mental health. We value being able to engage in offline activities, right? So what's the value behind the expectation?
Mm,
Um, Sometimes when our kids are little, we can get away without doing that because we can just do it because we don't really have
mm,
to have a reason. But with teenagers, it's really important to have sort of a why. They don't have to agree, they don't have to like it, but like when it's grounded and there usually is, we just don't always articulate. So what's the core value behind that expectation? And clarity is important because sometimes we're not clear. It's like, yeah, I want you to clean the kitchen. And they're like, okay. And they put like 3 glasses in the dishwasher, like, hey, I cleaned the kitchen. But sometimes we're not clear, you know? So like, here's what that means. Wipe down the
mm.
counters, put the dishes in the dishwasher, and sweep the floor. Or I
I
want
like
you to be home before dinner. What does that mean? So being clear, teenagers, and some more than others, really need us to be like, and sometimes it's helpful to even ask, can you repeat back? I just want to make sure we're on the same page here about what that expectation is.
There's a question that I heard from that Brene Brown apparently does with her team, and this idea of like, let me paint you a picture of what done looks like, or what I expect from
Mm.
this. And I love that idea. Like, this is what I
Oh,
imagine done. This looks like when you're done.
oh my gosh, that saves so much like potential stress and
Let's
conflict later.
match up expectations here.
Totally. That's a great one. Yeah. It's a little more on the front end, but it
Hmm.
helps a lot on the back end. And then consistency is about follow through. Because if I'm like, randomly saying, I want you to clean your room, and it's like they have no idea, or I'm like, or I want you to turn in your phone tonight at 9, but then last night I let you have your phone in your room, and it's just kind of random, and it's inconsistent. That can be really frustrating for teenagers. And
Yeah.
sometimes you'll see that when they're upset, it's because it's like, it kind of feels like it's out of nowhere. And so really thinking about, I'll talk to parents about this a lot, is really thinking about like, when I come up with an expectation, am I prepared to follow through? Because when we're able to enforce this consistently, like, your chore day, take out the garbage every Monday night is when the garbage trucks come and recycling pick up our stuff on the street. It comes on Tuesday morning. So Monday night is when our kids do recycling and garbage. And they just know it. And every Monday night, like, that's their job, right? And so they know it. So it's very consistent, and it's really no big deal. They just do it. Loading the dishwasher after dinner every time. So there was some fights up front of bickering, and but because we try to be really consistent with it, it becomes a lot easier. So being able to be consistent with expectations, like, can I ask yourself? And sometimes it's like, I don't think I can follow through, or okay, I need to really be ready. Like, they're gonna push back, they're not gonna like it sometimes, and so I need to follow up, because I'm going to ask them to get off at 8 o'clock, and they might say they'll get off at 8 o'clock, but if I don't follow through, they're going to be on till 8:30 or 9. And I just need to understand that I have to follow through. I need to, be in there, and then eventually they'll get better at it. So that's consistency. Capacity is about like their ability. Can they do it? You know, we have really intelligent kids, but that doesn't mean they know how to do some basic things. Time management, they might not be able to manage their time very well. So we might need to help them. Or I remember my wonderful 15-year-old daughter, who I love, but when she was 12 and she had to unload the dishwasher, she had never done it before. And she got really frustrated and was like, and I had to remember, like, she literally didn't know how to load the dishwasher. Like, I had to like show her how. And before that, initially I was like, how do you not know how to load the dishwasher? But I'm like, why would she? I'm like, she's literally never done it before. It doesn't matter that she's an intelligent 12-year-old, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes we kind of think like you should know, when it's like, but maybe they actually, no one's ever showed them. So we got to help them a little bit.
Yeah, we struggle with that sometimes because my 17-year-old has a chronic pain issue, and we want to have high expectations for her. But yes, sometimes I have to remember that her capacity is diminished, when she has pain, and it is frequently. So that can be hard.
Right. Yeah. And we do have to, and that capacity, that's a good point, is it can fluctuate. Like some
Yeah.
days, like their capacity is going to look different. And even parts of days, like morning or evening, might look really different in terms of what their capacity is for any given expectation. And so that does require, that comes back to the connection piece, which is really being attuned and empathetic and curious, paying attention, so we can kind of see and kind of adjust as needed. Like, oh, maybe you actually can't do this right now because you're about to like have a breakdown over this request to take out the garbage. Whereas last night you took out the garbage, no problem. So maybe I do need to kind of like, okay, so it sounds like you're not able to do that now. So then I need to be able to adjust. Maybe you still do it, but you can do it in an hour or 2 hours from now. Or maybe I give you something else to do that would be helpful instead. So that's where some of that flexibility and attuning to their capacity. And then the last one is just collaboration, which is working together. The older our kids get as they become teenagers, we really want to include them, let them have a seat at the table in decision making as much as possible. Like maybe there's like a list of, if we're just going to stick with the chore thing, there's 10 chores that need to be done. Like what two do you want to contribute to? Or, or we need to make this decision about, devices in the family. We want to have some screen time breaks. Like, what do you think would be a good way to incorporate that into our family? And we have the final say as parents, but the more we can include them in decision making, in expectations, the more buy-in they'll have and the
Yep.
smoother it'll go.
Yep.
So those
So
are the five
true.
C's.
Those are beautiful and really very, very helpful, I imagine. I love this. So, Yshai's book is Staying Connected with Your Teen, and Polyvagal Parenting Strategies to Reduce Reactivity, Set Limits, and Build Authentic Connection. And they can find you at yourname.com. Do you want to spell it for everyone?
Sure, sure. Yeah, YSHAIBOUSSI, YshaiBoussi.com. At Your Teen Therapist on Instagram
Yeah.
is another good place to find me, at Your
Is there
Teen Therapist.
anything, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our parents?
I think what I like to end with is just sort of like, there's so much good information. I mean, your podcast is amazing. I've been listening to some episodes, and it really is like, there are so many, um, it's like a library. Like you just can pick a topic. There's just so much in there. And I also like, and I'm sure you would agree, like it can feel overwhelming
Mhm.
sometimes. And it's like, I need to know everything and I need to do everything right. And we can get very perfectionistic. And so I just want to remind parents, it's like, there is a lot of really good stuff, and it is good to keep learning and growing, but also cut yourself slack. We all struggle. Like,
Yeah.
you and I, like, we're just regular parents. Like, we don't always do everything right. We mess up. I mess up all the time. I don't always set
Mhm.
good expectations. I'm not always clear. Even though I wrote a book about this stuff, like, so like, cut yourself slack. At the end of the day, just try to stay connected. I mean, when all when in doubt, just like say I love you, good night. You may have had a knockout, drag out fight that day and it was rough, and you're not proud of how you handled it. You can still just say I love you, good night, and we'll figure this out together. It doesn't have to be perfect. And don't compare yourself to other parents and other kids. Everyone's on their own journey. Every kid's going through their own thing. Every family's different, and so really try to avoid that as well. You're probably doing better than you think you are, and hang in there.
I love that. That what a beautiful thing to end with. Thank you, Yshai, for coming on the podcast, for putting this work. Thank you for abandoning business school and going to work with the teens and and doing this work. And I know it'll will have ripple effects. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us here on the Mindful Parenting Podcast.
Thanks a lot, Hunter. I really appreciate you and all the work you do. Really, it's really amazing, and appreciate the conversation. This was really fun.